Uncle Mac's Studebaker.
Who's Uncle Mac?
Uncle Mac was my mother's brother. Who kind of did a lot of things kind of the way I like to do them. You know, he was a collector of sorts. Little of this, a little bit of that. As near as we can determine, he parked his truck October 1st, 1956.
What year's the truck?
1951 Studebaker.
Did he buy it new?
Yes, he did. Approximately $1,400.
How many miles were on it when he parked it?
21,461.
And what happened to it then? He parked it and...
Man come in the middle of the night and wanted to sell him a truck. About time for the license plates to expire. So the other one was a heavier duty truck and stuff. So he spent the $300 for the other truck and started driving it. Never got this one out of the garage. Sat in the garage till, well, mid-80s anyway. Somewhere in there. Probably 15 years ago, we went and dug it out.
Didn't just get in and drive it away, huh?
No, but it's a very solid old truck. We're leaving everything stock. We've updated it. Run, my son, myself, put a full Chevy drivetrain in. It's coming along just beautiful.
The last major project, huh?
It was almost like it was designed for it to happen. Like the interior, the seat, all that stuff is brand new. No need to have it reupholstered. Nothing wrong with it.
Wow.
We're getting ready. Of course, the wiring and stuff like that, we're going to put a whole new wiring, which will be installed by a friend of mine, Jim Worrell. Everything new, so it's all up to date. It's got all the components ready to go.
Good. This was Ehrler's repair for over 20 years.
Made a lot of money out of here. Yeah.
At least that's what your accountant said, huh?
I made the money. Not the government.
There's the 54 Chevy. The green machine. The short sucker. It's hard to get a perspective. Back again.
Okay.
Always hard to know where to start. On the spot. I guess we can start. Why don't you tell us some about your childhood? Just where you grew up and what growing up and what your childhood was like.
I was pretty fortunate. I grew up right here. 531 East Sycamore Street. I wouldn't say I had a protective childhood. We got a lot of freedom. We didn't have any babysitters. We pretty well fared for ourselves after my mom went to work in 1953.
How old were you then?
That would have made me 8 years old. But we were smart enough that we knew how much trouble we could get in without getting into trouble. And I don't know if that's possible today. You know?
Especially what'd your dad do?
My dad was a policeman. Actually, in 1953, he wasn't a policeman. He was a policeman in 1940 to 44 to the city of Sycamore. Then he had the opportunity to go on the state police, so he took it. And when the elections came out in 1948, he was unemployed because everything went by political parties. So he went to work for the city of Sycamore, and he went to work for the sheepyards, feeding sheep that came in. The Chicago stockyards was a big deal back then, and every day about 35,000 sheep came through Sycamore on their way to the slaughterhouse in Chicago. So he kept pretty busy from 6 o'clock in the morning till 11:30 at night. So we didn't see too much of him. So that meant we had to deal with Mom. But she was pretty easy. She was pretty easy to deal with most of the time. But like I say, we didn't get in a lot of trouble because we knew what our limitations would be. And we didn't want to deal with Dad, you know. Back then, he was a very honest man and a very straightforward man. But if you finally needed a spanking, you were going to get it. But trust me, when you got one, you deserved it. You deserved it many times over. Fortunately, I think it took me 5 or 6 times to catch on to the system. You know?
Why? How'd you get in trouble? What'd you do?
Well, I'd do little antics with the lawnmowers. They have what they call water mains out in the middle of the yard. I hit that and broke the crankshaft in a brand new lawnmower. Another time he'd taken me to get new clothes for school and stuff, and told me, now you go in the house and put your old clothes and shoes on, finish this yard. Sure, I reached right down and started the lawnmower and cut the top off the shoe. Well, that was just. Oh, let's see.
So what was the town like? I mean, you grew up in Sycamore. I grew up in Sycamore.
Small town. I always considered it a very, very safe town. Very seldom anything happened in Sycamore.
Well, how'd you pass your time then? When your mom and dad went to work, what'd you guys do all day?
You might think I'm crazy, but we went swimming in the Kishwaukee River a lot.
I've done that.
Went looking for arrowheads, you know, along the banks. Dad knew enough to keep us busy, so he built us an underground fort out of railroad ties and everything. We had the only one, and it was the best. Had a heating stove in it and everything. Of course, rodeos, up through 1956, they had a rodeo here every year, so he built a great big tree house. 20 feet in the air, that would hold 25 people. We had the best. Ehrler's we had the spot. Didn't cost $2 to get in either.
Did you have TV? Did you watch TV all day?
No. We didn't get a TV until 1958. Didn't even know what one was. And then it had a screen about this big. I think Channel 2 was the only thing that came in. It was just fuzzy, so why bother to waste your time? About like today. Nothing on.
Who were your friends? Who'd you play with?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of kids did you run with?
One of my good friends was Wendell Mattis, who lived another street over, but this kid was tall and skinny. He's probably 5'6", 5'7", weighed 90 pounds, and could climb anything. If it had limbs on it, he could go up it.
He's still around today, isn't he? Still
Yeah.
comes into the shop once in a while, doesn't he?
I saw him a week or so ago at the Farm and Fleet looking for some parts. He's still tall and skinny.
Still the same.
Yeah.
What kind of people did you look up to when you were a kid? Did you want to be an astronaut, a fireman? What kind of things did you think
I wanted
about?
to work in a gas station.
How old were you when you thought that?
11 years old.
That's when it started, huh?
When it started.
How'd you get hooked into it? I mean, Grandpa wasn't really a car person.
No, Grandpa didn't want anything to do with cars. His only thing was he worked on cars because they were broke. Other than that, he didn't want anything to do with them. But as soon as I started going to junior high school, there was a gas station across the street, a Standard station, and to me that was just like a magnet. I'd go over there after school every day, throw my books in the corner. I found out you had to wash a lot of cars, you had to fix a lot of flat tires, pump gas.
How much did they pay you to do that?
The man told me he'd give me $1 an hour and all the donuts I could eat. Of course, I was only about 5'5", and I was about the size of a donut.
So the donuts was the hook for you, huh?
I soon found out what he meant was really $20 was the maximum. But I had to learn things. And
In a week?
yeah, $20.
That was a lot for an 11-year-old kid.
Yeah, well, I didn't get that very often.
Hmm.
But that was all day Saturday and all during the week. So
Is that when you got the name Fizz?
Fizz, I wouldn't tell people my name because I couldn't pronounce it. I couldn't say Glenn, I'd say Gwen. Now what kid wants to go around being called Gwen? You know? So after about 10 days of just calling me Ehrler, they said, well, we heard this commercial on the radio from Clark Oil. Those guys said their little helper's name's Fizz. If you're going to hang around here, you're going to be our little Fizz. So, well, it's either Fizz or Gwen.
And then when did all your friends and everyone else start calling you that? I mean, it just stuck somehow?
It just gradually kept on, you know, as I went and got into school and got a driver's license and, you know, got all that stuff. But that man let me drive cars around the station at 12 years old. And shoot, I'd stay there all day, just to drive that car in, you know. I mean, that was great.
So when did you actually start working on cars for yourself?
When I turned 16, he walked up and gave me a key to the door. And he said, you can use the shop after hours and on weekends, but don't leave the lights or the heat on. If you do, I'll take the key away. But I had bought a $20 1940 Chevy that needed work.
That was your first car?
That was the first one I had to work on. Actually, my first car that I actually bought and drove was a 49 Chevy Club Coupe. $42. And it needed work. I had to put about $16 or $18 in it before I got to drive it.
So you had $60 in a car
Yep.
that you drove around.
Drove it. I put that motor in like 7 cars.
You kept reusing the motor?
Yep. Motor was good, but I'd wear the bodies out. Actually, I'd wreck them. I had a lot of problems with accidents.
So from the time you were 11, you knew you wanted to work on cars?
I wanted to work on them every day. I knew I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to go to work on cars. But of course, my father had a little discussion with me. He said, you know, in the state of Illinois, he said, you can go to school until you're 21 years old. He says, I graduated from school in 1932 in the height of the Depression. He says, I think you'll graduate from school. Might not be this year or next year. But he said, you'll have plenty of time. So I knew I better buckle down and just go ahead and graduate when I was supposed to.
On track.
Yep.
What'd you do after you graduated then? Or how'd you do in school? I mean, if all you want to do is work on cars, how'd you make it through?
Well, let's say that I didn't have any high spots in my career, but I was in the upper half, but barely in the upper half. When it came to tests and stuff like that, I never studied for a test because if I studied for a test, I'd flunk it. It's like I retained enough knowledge of the overall concept that a true-false multiple choice test I could pass. If it had been an essay, I'd have been done. A true-false multiple choice, I could always pass those tests.
You could figure it out somehow.
So I could always get a B on the test, so no problem. If I was holding a D average, he had to give me a C.
So when you finally made it through, what did you do? You knew you wanted to work on cars, but...
I worked at State Street Motors while I was going to school the last 2 years. I worked in the parts room. I kind of knew I didn't want to be a parts man because they didn't get their hands dirty. You know, they just delivered parts. But with my leg problem and stuff like that, you know, I knew I had to do something besides.
What was your leg problem?
I was born, I couldn't bend my legs. I walked real stiff-legged. And so climbing upstairs or climbing ladders or anything like that, it was difficult.
How was that a challenge when you were a kid?
Everything was a challenge because you can always fall down, but you gotta fall up. You know, but I spent over the time the boss that my dad had at the Sycamore Shipyard was a Shriner, and so he gave me the opportunity to go into Shriner's clinic. And so when I was in 3rd grade, I spent over a semester at Shriners in Chicago, where they could observe and watch me to see if they could help me. And over the course of 4, 5, 6 years, they observed me. They really didn't figure out what was wrong with me, but they told me that I was going to be an invalid. I'd be wheelchair bound probably by the time I was 15. That just didn't fit my whole concept. I couldn't go fishing no more. I couldn't go swimming in the Kish. So I just kind of ignored it. You know, I figured out ways to do it, and I had a pretty good childhood, I thought. At the time, I probably didn't think I did.
So you just made do. Even though everyone told you were a cripple, but you just didn't feel like a cripple.
But it was the guy that lost an arm, or he lost a leg, or he was blind. He was a cripple. I wasn't a cripple. So I just went ahead and did what I had to do to keep moving on. You know,
but that didn't go away, right?
No, it never went away. No, never went away.
So how'd you work that into, how'd you do at work then? So as a mechanic, you had to be kind of...
Well, I never did get a job as a mechanic. Always got jobs doing something else. And then I got caught up in working in the factories, you know, doing sit-down jobs and, you know, back and forth and tedious work, you know, that just drives you crazy. Do the same job day in and day out, repetition. And so in 1970, I had the opportunity to buy a radiator shop, be my own boss, make all this big money. So I thought, cool, I'll do it. Married, had 2 kids, didn't know what I was getting into.
What were you doing at the time Where were you working at the time?
I was working at Barbara Green Company. They made paving equipment. I was a welder, doing production welding.
And didn't see any future?
I'd been doing it for 5 years, and I was doing the same thing I'd started.
How much did you make?
$3.48 an hour. Yep.
With a family?
With a family. We were doing real good with just one son. We'd get by $20 a week for groceries. But then this other little son came along, and all of a sudden it was $25 or $28 a week.